A warm welcome to all our panelists, and thank you so much for joining us in the morning session. Over to you, Ms. Maria.
A very good morning to all of you, and a big round of applause to the panelists. I think we've got some important stuff coming up in franchising. I think Gaurav has given us some great ideas on where franchising is moving and what is it that could directionally be seen as the future of franchising. But I would just like to add that, India is a young country where majority of our population is actually under 30. So whatever business you're doing, whatever product or service is it that you're building, think of that guy who is under 30. If you get, whether it's a business or a franchise or whether it's a product or a service that you're building, it has to be thought with a 30-year-old guy in mind or a lady in mind. So once you got that right, I think fundamentally a lot of other things will fall in place. So Dave, I'm going to start with you this morning. Dave is the CEO of ZLearn, and Z being a media company, and their education arm is ZLearn. And they've done pretty much the entire spectrum of education today, and they've probably been the fast movers in the education sector, getting their business models right. So I think now more than 10 years of franchising for ZLearn, right?
That's right.
And what have you seen changing in these last 10 years? I mean, fundamentally, how did the model start? How did it evolve? Where was it that you felt that, the new franchisee required things to be done in a new way? And that is where, in order to get fast growth, to be able to reach out to the new franchisee, the young franchisee of India, what was it that you changed or transformed in the system to keep the excitement going?
Okay. First of all, good morning to you all, and thanks for this opportunity. I really enjoyed the opening session from Gaurav, and just to give a perspective to everybody present in the room, we are more than almost 15 years old. We started in our journey in 2003. Today, in the country, we have two principal brands. One is called Kidsy. And the second one is called Mount Litra Z Schools. We operate in more than 750 cities, 1,800 plus Kidsy franchisees, probably Asia's the largest branded preschool chain, and the top three in terms of franchisee school network in the country. Just to come back to the question, I think what is very interesting is that almost 90% of my network, and when I say my network, I'm talking about my partners, I'm talking about the teachers, I'm talking about the support staff, are women. Wow. And that's the beauty of it. And I think we as a company have played a very instrumental role in getting women entrepreneurship in this country. And I think it's a wonderful thing when I look at it from my perspective. But I must tell you that the average age has declined over the time. In the past, we had more men who came forward to take up the franchisee. But as we progress, and you'd be surprised to know this phenomena, we talked about Bangalore, and I must tell you, out of these 1,800 franchisees, we have 175 franchisees only in the city of Bangalore. Bangalore has really responded very well. And most of this, as I said to you, most of them, are women entrepreneurs. But as we move farther and farther deeper into this country, and India, I completely agree with what Gaurav said, is that it's a very complex country because every district is different. And not only in terms of language, but different in terms of expectations too. We still see, we believe that as we move deeper into this country, we'll have more men coming forward. But as we have been surprised, I must tell you that, women entrepreneurship, women taking the lead to open a preschool is equally strong as we move beyond the district headquarters. We are coming up with a new brand, Beyond Kidsy, predominantly targeted at the rural market. But the things are slightly different when I look from the K-12 perspective. Here, the investments are very different. The economics is very different, but we have mostly men coming forward and running schools. We'd be more than happy to have women also coming forward and opening schools across the country. But just to put it in perspective, answer the question, I think the average age of a person who wants to become an entrepreneur has significantly declined. We see women mostly in the age between 30 to 35 who are running the schools, and they're running it very, very successfully.
Well, that's great. And I memean, incidentally, since he mentioned women entrepreneurs, so we've got a report which is releasing, but just to give you an early teaser in it, we found that 26% franchisees today in India are women, which I think used to be about 3 or 4 years back, used to be about 16% odd. And whether they come forward as single or individual women entrepreneurs or franchisees, or as couple, or maybe as a family setup, but I think the whole sort of participation of women in the franchising sector, as it should be, is now getting larger. So you should always look at whoever is looking to franchise should keep in focus the women entrepreneur to a very large extent. Dave, you mentioned about Bangalore being a great market, but I think today a lot of franchisors and also the models, they are very accommodating of small cities. So what is the action that you see in small cities when it comes to franchising? I know that you're fairly very penetrated into small cities of India. You have franchisees over there. So what are the trends you've seen in the smaller cities of India? How are they different from bigger cities of Bangalore in terms of your franchisee performance, your franchisee profile, and I think eventually the output that you get from him for that city as well?
Well, one, definitely in terms of the amount of investments that is required, the investments are very different. The kind of investments that are required in Bangalore, for example, a city, and the kind of investment that is required, for example, I'm taking Raipur as an example to illustrate this point, are very different. However, you'd be surprised to know that the kind of schools that are being run are equally impressive, equally impressive. The challenge, the fundamental challenge that we face as we go further deep into this country is the quality of teachers. And I see that in all humbleness, because everything that we create, everything, okay, can be replicated by somebody else. Okay, what can't be replicated is the people who actually go out and implement it. And by that, the teachers play the most instrumental, the most important role here. We find a real difficulty because, unfortunately, in this country, I have to admit, we don't pay our teachers very well. Teaching as a profession is usually not the first choice. And therefore, the kind of graduates that we get from the various schools, B.Ed schools principally, we have to invest a significant amount of time and money in training them to bring them up the curve. It becomes more and more difficult as we go deeper into this country. But in terms of their aspiration, in terms of their vision, there is absolutely no difference. The other challenge that I want to highlight is that the parents that we talk to, most of the parents, today, have not gone through a preschool. And therefore, to help them understand why a preschool is a very, very critical component in the life of the child is a fascinating journey, I must tell you that. Because it's a fairly competitive scenario in India. So today, as you see more and more K-12 schools coming up with their own preschool section, and not because we run one of the most successful preschool chain in Asia, I truly believe that in a formal school, the focus is always on the higher grades, and justifiably so. There is nothing wrong in it. But what gets lost in the process is that because we have such a great desire to put a child into a good formal school, that we let go of those very, very impressionable time between typically 2.5 years to 6 years, the most formative year for a child. And therefore, it is absolutely imperative that every child goes to a formal preschool. Not necessarily kidsy, can go to any other. There are many other good standalone preschools too. Some branded preschools also are doing very well. But I think it's important that, the parents that we talk to, if I look at the parents in the metro cities and if I look at the parents of non-metro city, while their aspirations are similar, but awareness levels are very different. And that's an area that we need to work on.
Sure. So I'm going to come to you, Yash. Yash is the CEO of Oppo Mobiles India, and I think one thing that I've learned about mobile companies at large, whether they're Indian or Chinese or American, is that they work on adrenaline. I mean, the kind of distribution setups that you build are much faster than I see in other industries. The reach out, the fact that people are excited about the product. Now my question to you is, one, I mean, and considering that this is product distribution, how do you get it going? How do you get the customer excited, the distributor excited to be able to sort of put it forward to people? And secondly, how do you maintain or make that excitement and that energy sustainable? The idea is not just to sell mobiles today. It's about doing it like 10 years, a decade of success is what one at least looks for. So how do you manage to achieve that?
So first of all, we'd like to start off with when we came into India around 4 years ago, the whole market was transforming into the e-commerce segment. So that was a time when most of the local retailers and all the retail shops, which you see nowadays with our Vivo's hoardings on their stores, it's because we promoted them with the higher incentives in terms of the dealer pricings, as well as even the distributors. They were given a better margin compared to what other brands were giving. So that was one way to get our product into the shelves of the Indian retail stores as well as into the minds of the Indians. Of course, we did that with marketing, but the way we impressed them was we gave them a good product. We gave them after-sales support from our side. They didn't have to take care of that. And they got better incentives from other companies, which were, all of them were one way going to be better than the other companies which were giving that. So in that way, when we brought the whole brand into India, and it totally changed the consumer mind because we penetrated it with our huge marketing as well as our off sales without the e-commerce. Now we've forayed into the e-commerce segment, but to basically promote a new product in a segment which you're going to have, which is already running, you need to look at the requirements of all the other people in the industry. So if you're going to make them happy, at the end of the day, the product is going to go into the customer's hands. So I guess that's how we tried to go in with and making everyone happy with that. Yeah.
Sure, but how do you manage to keep it sustainable? So how do your dealers want to be sticking with you? No?
So we don't just do more of incentives, but we have dealer programs as well. So we have certain slabs. So when certain dealers finish those slabs, we give them various incentives. I can't talk about that, but
sure.
It could be in certain travel or just meet and greet with an actress or an actor, go for an award show which we are sponsoring, or even Big Boss for a matter of the fact.
Sure, but I mean, do you see? I mean, obviously, competition will come from anywhere. It can come from Sweden, it can come from US. It just, and you don't even know that it's coming that fast, particularly in your industry. So I mean, how do you make sure that the stickiness of the dealer is there? I understand completely, awarding him and sort of recognizing the good work that he's doing. But at a group level or at a larger level, what is it that sort of
I guess it's more of the product. Because the most important thing in our industry is how the product is. Apart from your marketing, all your incentives you give to your dealers, it's more about the product. Like when the dealers also experience the product, they go in and say that, oh, it's almost half the price of iPhone. Why am I paying for it? But it also has its ups. But it's basically the product which keeps our dealers to us. And basically when we give an excellent after-sale service, the customers come back to their retail stores and tell them that we're really happy and we would like to go for another product. So that's when they know that when people are coming again and again for the same brand, it means that we're trying to build a relation not just with the consumers but with the dealers, because they in turn get regular sales again and again. So that's how we keep them with us.
So do you put up separate centers for after-sales service?
Yes, we do have separate centers for after-sales.
And they are franchised?
They have franchise. Some of them. Okay. Most of them are company owned.
As well. So, Yash, you would love to know, I mean, since Oppo is a Chinese mobile company and as I think Gaurav said, Chinese companies do know, they're the new Arabs, so they do know their business right. So what is it about franchising in China or distributorship in China that really India can learn?
I think the most important thing would be to live up on your words, because what we've seen is that when we're going into an agreement in franchising, I mean, most of the companies would not agree to this, but there are certain hiccups which you face from both sides. And the only difference in China is that once they give their word out for a certain contract or they are up for doing something, they follow on to it. Like they make sure that no matter what, they would comply with whatever they have been promised and whatever they have promised to the other party. So that's one thing which at the moment we're lacking in India. And also another part is that certain people still have a hiccup of investing with a brand. I mean, the most important thing when you do a franchise is believing in the brand. That's only when you're supposed to take a franchise or a product. So that's also little to be developed in India now, since we've been seeing, because we've just started franchising in the last 2 years. So we're still growing in that part. We've always believed in company-owned outlets, but since we wanted to expand more, we've already done it in the rural areas. Like we own 80% of the rural stores we have, because that's our major market. But in the metro cities, since the rents are high, so we always approach a franchisor so we can like work with them. But there are certain hiccups like this which we face, where after the commencement of the business, people start understanding that we can't do this, you can't do this. So that's a big hiccup which I think we need to like focus on and like change that for our country.
Sure. So, but one thing I personally would love to know is, how can Indian companies, Indian brands have a bigger appetite for growth? That is what I distinctively find there in China, which I don't see in India. I mean, while we want to grow, we're very ambitious, but I do feel that China has a bigger appetite to grow than we have.
I guess from the previous speaker who was speaking, he did say, as he said, the Chinese are new Arabs, but they also have a mindset like the US companies. They think worldwide. Now, our products, now the new brands which India is launching, like Indian brands are launching, they're consumer centric to their nation right now. I think they need to have a bigger approach in the worldwide sector and think of various countries in their aspect of their product. So only when you do that, you can get recognition in various other countries, and you never know which country might shine for you and make your product up and running for that country. So you should have a global centric mind frame for your products. That's one of the things which really makes a big impact for an Indian company.
Sure. Great. Thanks. I'm going to come to you, Manish. Manish is heading a fund, which is both a fund and a family office. And, it's being held, Manish, that, if you really want to take growth seriously, you need to be sort of associated with the fund. You either need to have funding in your organization, or at least the fund needs to be part of your operations in some way to achieve the big growth. And we're seeing it worldwide, where there are a lot of consumer brands which have been taken over by private equity funds, and they have seen far faster growth than they did earlier when they were running as an organization themselves. So, so what is your advice to consumer companies today, why they should be associating with funds or be working with funds in some way for growth or growing larger and faster other markets? The second thing I've seen is, particularly for American companies, they today give out a master franchise to a fund who would, let's say, manage a, for example, it's a classic case of Burger King actually being managed by a fund, which is Everstone Capital. And they are the master franchisees for India who are running it. So do you see merit in that for Indian brands also and other Asian brands, since you based out of Singapore? So how do you see this market growing?
So in India, as Gaurav was saying, India isn't a single country at all. And capital and reach play an immensely important role in how you can scale up a business. Within India, you have regulation within each state, cultural taste, and to grow to a pan-India, to almost every state, you definitely need capital. But how you use capital is kind of tricky in the sense that where do you need more capital and where do you need less capital to actually grow the business is what we would come in and evaluate. Does it make business sense to go into Sikkim, or does it make more business sense to stay within Chennai, a local like that? So in the sense that when we hear businesses come to us and we want to expand in the Northeast, we look at, hey, are there any customers in the Northeast for your product? Why are you trying to take capital from us to expand there? Is this, justifiable capital? So we do evaluate franchisees in the sense that if we give them capital, will they be able to grow their business 10 times, or will they be able to grow their business 3 times? And that plays an immense role in whether capital should be an equation within a franchising model.
Sure. But for brands who've actually taken, I mean, this is purely like a personal opinion that you may have. For brands who've actually been either run by private equity or owned by private equity in majority, how do you see their performance versus other consumer brands which are actually either owned by or run as a corporate or run as a, I don't know, a mid-sized company?
Correct. So, so private equity brands are more focused on a certain horizon within, say, a 10-year period, because they have to provide returns. They have a fiduciary duty to provide runs, and they run maybe their model in maybe 8 to 10-year horizon on how they're going to run the business. While if you are a franchisee, this may be your livelihood, and you're going to be in it maybe 20 years if you're stuck with if you're with a good franchise, correct? So say if you take something like Subway, you may plan to do it for 10, 15, 20 years. So in that sense, you definitely want to look at how you want to grow yourself. Do you want to manage 1, 2, 3 businesses, or do you, because this is for most people who are looking at getting to franchise, they may be looking at 2, 3, not the way private equity looks at, which is long term, 8 years. How do we reap the benefits of this corporation, rather than how do I grow my business, correct? It's a totally different mindset between private equity and individual who's running a franchise shop.
Sure. And I mean, of course, considering that there have been, there has been a large play of American companies being taken over by private equity funds. Do you see this trend becoming big in Asia? I mean, where actually good companies, good franchise companies will be either majorly owned by private equity funds for, I mean, and there is, I've seen that at least Indian companies and a lot of Asian companies, they're very sort of hesitant when it comes to achieving growth out of Asia. Even probably their best bet is Middle East market. But let's say going to Europe, going to Australia, going to the US, Africa, for that matter, as the future market is not something that they would, jump up to. So I think funds can play a pivotal role in getting them into this
So
market.
if you look at the 2 iconic Indian brands right now, Ola and Oyo, and they're heading out, meaning they're not saying, hey, we're satisfied with the India market, we're going to go out. Ola has already done pretty well. They've got 15% market share in Australia. And so you have to pick your battles and look at, hey, is there a monopoly in that market with the current franchise? And can I go in because I have a lower cost structure and I can tap into the market, provide as good as service with the current players at a lower cost? So you do have to evaluate that, and I think you'll see brands from India go out because they've learned the hard way in such a diverse country. Hey, if I can service a customer at $4, why not at $15? No, my base is so good. I mean, my cost to service these customers is so good. I can go and compete with international brand without any hesitation. So I think you'll see a lot of Indian brands go out because they've learned in one of the hardest markets to operate in. Very price-sensitive market, and I think you'll see that within the next 15, 20 years, you'll see a lot of brands go out. I definitely think that will happen.
Sure. Great. I'll come to you, Troy. So Troy is, of course, based in Asia, and he's seen franchising both in Asia and Australia. and across the world, he clearly follows the trends of franchising very closely. So, technology today is not just a trend or something that empowers businesses, but it's like a sector by itself within franchising, right? And how have you seen that play out in Asia? And I see today there are lots of companies in India who are developing apps. They're developing, I mean, he gave a classic example of Ola and Ojo hotels, which is actually, I would say more, Ojo is pretty much like a conversion franchise outfit. And Ola is about micro franchising, where you empower the drivers to make commission out of what they earn under the brand name of Ola. Do you see such models evolving in Asia, where technology is the primer of the entire business, but there is a lot of fulfillment franchisees who come forward to make sure that the business grows? And overall, how do you see technology being a big game changer for franchising in the country?
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Yeah. It's very interesting, having been in the franchise industry internationally for more than 30 years, how much things have changed. Keywords in franchising for a good 20 or 30 years were words like customer service and quality and location. And over the last 5 years, the conversation around franchising has changed dramatically. And I think earlier Gaurav spoke about macro trends, and probably one of the biggest macro trends, not just in franchising, but in the world today is technology. Conversations around franchising in expos and events all over the world are now talking about the impact of big data, IR 4.0. These are the keywords that are being discussed in the context of franchising. I think that that is very interesting when you look at technology in franchising, that one of the dynamics now is that the cost-benefit analysis, or the cost-benefit of technology has dramatically shifted to the point where technology is available to not just the big boys, the McDonald's and the Starbucks and the KFCs and the Subways, but everyone from startup franchise businesses in grab and go and micro sector up to major companies in big box and the hotel concepts likewise can use the technology, and not doing so in this day and age would really be, I think, a fatal flaw for any franchise. Interestingly, I was looking at some statistics. India has the second highest number of internet users in the world today after China. But the other interesting statistic is when you look at 5-year to 10-year upside in new internet users, India also has the second highest potential. That's kind of a staggering statistic, if you ask me. And really, for franchise businesses to be able to compete, they have to figure out how to get in touch with these young consumers. And I have 3 children in the 20 to 30 age group. And the way they live their life compared to me growing up and even now, it's just dramatically different. And being able to understand what these people need and to get to them in terms of messaging and bringing them in and engaging them in your business is not the same as it used to be. I think in terms of technology, cloud technology is quite amazing to me. The ability to use a cloud to manage, very affordably, to manage many different aspects of your business. Other technologies, beacon technologies and the likes. These are technologies which are huge opportunities for varying types of franchise companies, both food service and retail. Franchising technology companies as franchises, it's a very interesting concept. I was researching and saw a company that franchises cloud-based franchise model worldwide, and I think more and more you're going to see companies that are platformed on technology which deliver services to other franchises and other retailers which start to use licensing and franchising to expand their business internationally. So in my opinion, embracing technology is not something that strategically you should consider. It's an absolute must in the franchise industry today, regardless of the nature of your business and who your target consumer is.
Sure. So, another big trend, at least, which is global, and I think for global it was for a very different reason, but I think it's also caught up with a lot of Indian franchises, is about looking at world markets from day one. I mean, I can imagine a market like, if you're a franchisor which is born out of Singapore, you have to look outside, because Singapore by itself is very small, and how much can you grow, right? But in India, as a market, we are fairly large, and there's a lot of growth to be done here. But nevertheless, I find a lot of Indian companies today not just planning themselves for India, but actually planning themselves from other markets like Asia, Singapore, Middle East. They would go or expand equally fast over there. So Dave is, already going global with ZLearn. So what are your learnings? I mean, we're largely unregulated market when it comes to franchising, but when you go to more mature markets, they're far more regulated. There's more law over there. So as an organization, how hard is it to adjust to franchising in those countries, and nevertheless be able to be successful and make a mark in those markets? So what is your opinion on that?
Okay. Well, education is fairly well regulated, at least in India. It's on the concurrent list. By that I mean that both the center as well as the states can formulate regulations. And especially in K-12, if you are affiliated to any boards, the board also come up with their own set of regulations. So it's a fairly regulated one. Preschool in India is, however, not regulated, but we welcome regulation. I must tell you that. We welcome regulation. We believe that with the regulation, the market can only expand and expand in the right direction. However, the moment you move beyond India, we have our operations in Nepal, and we also want to start operations in other SAARC countries, predominantly Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, to begin with. There are similar regulations, and I must tell you, most of the SAARC countries, especially since I've worked both in the financial services domain as well as in education, these countries' regulation usually follow the regulations in India, in the sense they are quite similar. And one is working with the regulation part of it. The other part is getting the execution. The execution becomes a big challenge. By that I mean that if you really want to have your mark there in those countries, you need to have your own people, okay, from those countries. You need to have a certain element of fulfillment being done in the country itself. If, for example, for me to send my consignments or my materials from India to Nepal is a huge challenge. The custom clearances that takes place, the challenges that I face in terms of taxations, also, makes the operations fairly, we suffer from a cost disadvantage. In terms of, if I want to really expand in a market like Nepal, I need to have very strong local partners. I need to have my fulfillment capabilities in Nepal itself, and I need people from Nepal. And the same would hold true for countries like Bangladesh and Sri Lanka.
Sure. Yash, you're there pretty much globally all over. So dealing with different dealer setups, at the HQ level, how hard is that? I'm sure each country has its own set of challenges that one goes through, their own political, economic environments. So how does one sort of get it right and make it less complex for themselves to get into new markets?
To get into new markets, as Debashi said, it's right. You need to have the people from that respective market present in your company to even help you or even assist you in making the decisions for this new country. Because apart from us who just want to foray or venture out into a new country to establish our businesses, the people who we'd have from the same country would definitely give a better idea of how their country works, how their various regulations are, how their duty structures are, what their consumers' behavior is, and many other things which play a big role in deciding of the product in your country. So I guess the only main thing you should have is to have the right people from in your organization who would play the right role in creating a brand for that respective region. I guess that's the most important thing we should have for when you have a foray into another country for business.
Which is to have the right talent actually helping you lead there. Okay, that's a great thought. Coming to you, Manish, you know, I understand. So let me put it this way to you: that when a fund really comes into and takes a board position in an organization, a startup, or a young company to make it grow faster, what is it that they really bring? What is it that this person who represents the fund really, because obviously there is a founder and there is this team who would do the ops and everything. So the idea is obviously not to do what they are doing already. So what is it that the differential this talent or the board member brings into an organization?
Correct. So as Deb was saying, he was going to Nepal and he's having challenges within different country. We have a bunch of businesses within our portfolio that are working in multiple countries. So when we come in to partner with someone, we'll look at how are we going to grow the business, not through capital, but through our reach, correct? Our distribution, so we already know a Nepal market because we are there. As Carlsberg, we are there in Nepal. We know the regulation, we know the people, we know the distribution. So we would look at someone like Dev and say, hey, we can take you to Nepal. You're having challenges getting custom cleared. We know how to get that custom cleared. We know the local politics. We know the distribution. It's not only about giving him capital. It's about also getting him to the right people who can help him move his business forward. And that actually truly plays as critical or sometimes more critical role to get the business off the ground and to get growth actually really an exponential growth.
Yes, great. So Troy, I mean, you know, you've seen brand going into different global markets, and sometimes it's successful and sometimes not so successful in some markets. Where do you think the laggards are? Where do you think a brand can go wrong when it's actually going global or looking at territories which are outside its own home market? And so basically just tips to some things not to do when you're getting into a new market.
Great. I think that obviously time is the only irreplaceable commodity, and when people do a deal, they really want to capitalize and get in and try to outpace the competition. But I think one of the biggest mistakes that people make is they rush to market with the product. Gaurav mentioned earlier in the opening address about the number of brands that have failed in India, and big brands and well-known and established brands who have outstanding capability and success in other international markets. And often I think that rush to market is critical because there's not enough pre-entry market analysis, and there's not enough research. I think there's kind of everyone's heard of the 80-20 rule in business or in life, I suppose, and for many years you would hear international franchise development executives say, we'll use the 80-20 rule. 20% we'll consider modifying and adjusting, but 80% of our system and our tools are sacred. And I think that's actually a very dangerous assumption to make in the international business, in international franchising, because to think that 80% of what you do in the U.S. would apply and work in India is quite silly, frankly. I have a theory that you need a 20-60-20 rule. There's probably 20% that you absolutely must change, 20% which maybe relate to intellectual property and other elements of the business which you absolutely cannot change, and the 60% that sits in the middle is the market entry analysis and research that the Indian company and the foreign company have to do to ensure that they make good decisions before they plant the first flag in India, and therefore reduce the risk of failure coming into the market.
Sure. So I think some great thoughts out here. Love to hear from the audience. I mean, I'm sure you have your own set of challenges when you're expanding, when you're looking at newer territories. So happy if you have some questions that you would like to put on to the panel. Yes, sir. Can we have the mic? Can you just? Yes, I guess.
I'll just shout. I wondered if the new panel could tell me what the funding attitude towards franchises from Indian banks.
So, Dave, you want to touch upon that? For franchise financing by
So,
banks?
so I do tech a lot more than Indian banks. In a franchise model, it's pretty much balance sheet driven, as Gaurav was saying. Hey, is your balance sheet, looking at your balance sheet, is the business model sustainable, and can you actually franchise this out? Now, if there's an individual that you're franchising to and they need a loan to open up a franchise within locally in India, so that would be a key ingredient, as long as. But if you're absolutely new, then I'm not sure with banking and how they would do it. We actually don't fund. We don't fund franchises, and that I can't give you a correct answer with whether banks would do it. But I'm sure a balance sheet, as Gaurav was saying, would play a critical role on getting funding from banks.
Dave, you would have franchise funding happening?
Not much from the banks. The funding requirements are very different for our scale of operations. So typically in a preschool, you need something around 15 lakhs of initial investments. And there's a possibility that you can break even, not a possibility, but usually most good franchises actually break even in the first year itself. For the school, the requirements are very different. It's typically between 15 to 20 crores. And the break-even usually happens either in the 5th or the 7th year. And therefore, not much funding from the bank side, but some of the NBFCs have actually come forward to fund. But not during the initial stages, maybe after you have settled, maybe after 3 or 5 years. Yes.
Sure. Yeah, but the franchise financing system, I can tell you, in India is still quite underdeveloped. We would love to see banks more actively participating in franchise financing than they're doing currently. But having said that, today they do regard them as a lot of franchise concepts as micro, small and medium enterprises, and therefore are coming forward to now finance them more. But the way they work is that they would actually tie up with, let's say, a franchisor like Dave, and they would then ask them to do a selection of the franchisee. And do you actually sometimes stand as a guarantor also for the franchisee?
Actually, this is just it's just beginning right now.
Sure.
Very few such cases have actually come to our has come as a proposal to us. But as you rightly said, that it still has to develop the responses, or there is not much work that has happened in this area. Let me put it in this way.
Yeah. So I would say it works reverse. It goes from the franchisor to the franchisee financing, instead of the franchisee going to the bank and then maybe talking to the franchisor that he's looking for bank financing. So I think the reverse needs to now starts happening in India in order for franchise financing to really grow.
Yeah. So
yeah.
Sorry. Just to add to that, you're right. So, for example, we work with State Bank of India. Okay, but not many has met successes, in the sense that either they did not ask for such. Usually, smaller partners who require around 15 lakhs usually don't require any kind of finances. So that's taken off. But usually, people who want to start off businesses, especially in the school, which requires significant amount of capital, so far very few. What we require is that, which is interesting, and I must share this with the audience out here, is that we have people with who have funds, who wants to start a school. But remember, when you build a school, it's usually for the long term. And as his fortune changes over a period of time, we find his funding, his ability to continue to stay invested is a big question mark. That's a time when he requires help. Because, for example, I can give you some examples. We have some partners, and Gaurav did speak about finding the right partners. We have a few of them who was associated with the mining industry. Now, as the mining industry in India, went through a significant amount of stress, they had difficulty in sustaining their investments as far as schools are concerned. And therefore, at this point of time, it's very important that they find alternate sources of fund so that the school continues on its journey. And that's where it's required. But as rightly pointed out, it's more from our side that we need to take the initiative to take this forward.
Yeah. Yes, please.
I have a question for Mr. Dave. You spoke about the regulation in the preschool industry, and you told that it would help to increase the preschool industry. I feel that if you regulate it, it will shrink it up. What is that regulation you're talking about? Like, what kind of regulation it will require for this particular industry?
Okay, regulation per se is not a bad word. Okay, it's a misnomer. A lot of people talk about regulation in ways, but I have seen markets expand exponentially when the right regulations have been formulated. The problem is not with the regulators. The problem is not with the regulations. The problem is with the implementation. What happens is that if you really look at the market, the preschool market in India, it's completely unregulated, right? So you have very large number of, single stores, okay, who many of them are doing a fine job, by the way. It does not mean that they're not doing a great job. They're doing a fine job. But what happens is that it brings a certain degree of structure, okay, certain requirements, some basic requirements. Remember, in our business, while, everything looks very nice, every single day in my network, there are more than 2.5 lakh children who come to our schools. 2.5 lakh every single day. Okay. Now remember, to provide a safe, secure, okay, environment is our responsibility. I cannot shy away from that. One single incident, okay, God forbid, can actually bring down the entire network. So these are some of the very important things that we need to talk about. So when you talk about safety and security, I think regulation is required. Okay, there is no taking away from that. So I think regulation is welcome, especially for large organized players, and I think a lot of other players will also enter the market.
And I feel regulation also brings something else with it. I mean, whether it's the education industry or any other industry, it always brings far more financing to come into the system, which otherwise usually banks are wary of giving. It brings a lot of good talent to come into your industry, because obviously the regulation and the play, therefore, of the industry becomes much bigger. The government starts recognizing it that way. So I think there are a whole lot of external factors which one does not account for on the face of it, but they become much better once you're in regulated conditions. We'll have one last question, sir. You can go ahead and ask it, but I think we can do more one-to-one after this.
Yeah, good morning. Myself, Suresh, brand owner of Ambre. Like we are in a home decor, like similar Zara home. So we just started last year, 2017, and we opened 3 franchise stores. The challenges comes here, like we have an investment of 1 crore, and the investors little worry about that how, and we want to open more than 50 or 100 per year. So how we can speed up for this? Can suggest something here?
So I think the most important thing would be to connect with your partners and show them what your product is worth of. If you really feel that your product is worth of that investment, so you need to make your partner believe that, whoever is taking your franchise, so that he understands what the product is. You're going to show him how you're going to work with the brand. You're going to establish a brand. You're not just trying to sell a product, but you're trying to sell a solution now. Even in home decor, nowadays, just selling a product is not the only thing. You have to sell a solution or a new concept which the customers want these days. So you need to establish that with your team and give them a value for money. So even with their return on investments, you should chalk out a way where you could get them their money back as fast as you can, so that their investments which they have made as huge investments, as you said, 1 crore. So when they get that return on investment back again in a quicker way with your product, So you would have more people pouring into getting your franchisee for your products, which would significantly increase the minute you start giving a better solution with a better return on investment for your product, I believe.
Can I add to it? Anybody else? Okay. I think it's also important. Thank you, Yash. You were right. Also to have your own stores. Okay. And Gaurav did speak about it today in the morning, and I kind of resonate with it very strongly. I think the proof of concept is very important that we run our own preschools and our own K-12, and these are supposed to be the star locations. You know, when I used to work with Western Indian, we used to have the star locations. Western Indian is phenomenally successful across the globe, and we wanted to demonstrate what an ideal location would be. Okay, and therefore, what an ideal preschool or what an ideal school would be. It's very important for every franchisor to have their own stores and demonstrate that this is what is possible.
Sure. I hope that answers the question. Okay, sir, since I said yes, so I'll just give you this very, very last question, then I'm going to hand it over
Hello.
to Prerna.
My question to Yash. Since last 3 years, 4G service is coming into a picture in India, and it is booming. And your product, you can say it is smartphone. It depends on entirely upon the operator, 4G services. As of now in India, there are 27% of the customers who are using 4G handsets, and there's a bigger scope. My question to you, how you would rate, suppose if a customer goes for a handset, if your dealer sells 100 handset in a month, now how much he sells through financing? Because to my mind, financing is playing a very vital role in your growth as of now. And you have tied up with a lot of NBFCs. So, and how do you see the 5G still is not there, but 4G there is a lot of scope. But still there are a lot of population who is not, who can't afford 4G handsets.
You want to do it here or one-to-one?
I'll do it one-to-one.
Okay.
I'll speak to you about this on one-to-one basis, because this is more of giving detailed information or some.
Yeah. So let's keep, I think, the discussion more generic, because this is way too specific.
I'm just talking about the financing of the franchisee, financing of the commodity. It is playing a very vital role.
We don't promote like financing for franchisee. That's totally on the people who are taking the franchise. But as you've seen outside the stores as well, you've seen this new word called loan pay phone. So that's basically the thing. It's just an extra way of promoting the product. So like people who don't have an average fund to even spend 6,000 to 8,000 rupees on a phone, they can opt for a loan, which they can take on for a 6-month period or a 9-month period, and they can basically have a phone. So we're trying to cater to those people in the rural markets or even in our metro cities who would not have the willingness to have a phone. Like it's a necessity now, but now people go for secondary phones as well. So our phones with most of the people in metros are secondary phones, which they use for their businesses, for their phone calls. So we're trying to promote that. So I think the whole financing is a new thing which we've conducted in the past 8 to 9 months. And it's going quite good for us because we've had a lot of increase in customers. Also, another thing, what you asked of 4G, we did partner up with Reliance Jio, where we were giving 4G SIM cards with our phones as well. Of course, now they have their own product which comes with inbuilt 4G. But I guess in the next 5 years, it's going to increase to higher folds the way we see it now. Because I guess previously Troy said that India has a bigger growth in the next 5 years again. So I guess by that time, we'd have a better percentage of 4G users in the country. Of course, outside 5G is rolled out in certain countries. Korea's been having that since a long time, as I know of. Japan is getting into it. So I guess more than just 4G, we have to even look at 5G if we're going to talking on the high-speed bandwidth ratio for today's date.
Yeah, thank you.
Great. So I think that was a lovely discussion we had this morning. And I'm sorry, sir. I would love to entertain you, but we're really running out of time now. So as I was saying, there are a lot of parameters to success. A lot of them are individual and a lot of them are shared. And I think as good franchisors and prospective brands of, or prospective large consumer brands of tomorrow, we really recognize and play to our strengths. And the learnings that we can take either from within our industry or from other industries can be a shared resource which we can use for further success. So thank you for actually sharing your insights this morning, and I think whatever questions, I know we've not been able to take all of them, but whatever you have, please come individually one-to-one and meet with our speakers, and I wish you a great day ahead. Thank you very much once again.
A big hand, ladies and gentlemen, for the panel. Please stay back. Thank you so much for a very insightful and full of learning session. I now request Ms. Ritu to kindly felicitate the eminent speakers with a token of appreciation. But before we do that, I request the panelists to please stay back, as now we will release the FRANCAST report. I request Mr. Gaurav Maria and Mr. Deepak Yadav to please join us. Mr. Deepak Yadav is CEO Frank Corp India. Can we all please welcome them on stage? The FRANCAST report, ladies and gentlemen, is the most comprehensive white paper on the franchise industry for the year 2018-19. As all our speakers get the report, let me quickly tell you a few important points. Are we ready to release the report? All right. Ladies and gentlemen, with this, we release the FRANCAST report. A round of applause. Few highlights. Consumer spending is an engine of economic growth. High disposable income, urban population, high entrepreneurial energy and growing distribution of products and services drives franchising in India. Franchising industry has been growing 30 to 35% annually. Franchising is one of the largest employment contributors. Thank you so very much. Thank you, Mr. Gaurav Maria. Thank you, Mr. Deepak Yadav, for joining us. The copy of this report is available outside, so you can collect the same. Thank you so much. And now I request Ms. Ritu Maria to please felicitate the eminent speakers with a token of appreciation. We'll start with Mr. Devashankar Mukhopadhyay, CEPZ Learn Limited. A round of applause, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you so much, sir, for joining us. Mr. Yash Parvani, CEO Oppo India. Thank you so much. Mr. Manish Priyadarshi, Venture Principal Lotus Singapore. Thank you so much, sir. Mr. Troy Franklin, COO World Franchise Associates. Thank you so very much for joining us. Thank you for your benign presence.